The fight against ISIL will remain difficult, but we will continue to draw on all elements of our national power: military, intelligence, diplomacy, homeland security, law enforcement, and the strength of our communities. And I am confident that we will prevail.
President Obama at the State Department a short time ago talking about the fight against ISIS. Meantime, new shocking allegations from the chair of the House Intelligence Committee that evidence has been destroyed in the investigation into intelligence at U.S. Central Command.
It is vital that this committee protect and seriously consider the testimony of the many whistleblowers who have provided information to us. For example, we have been made aware that both files and emails have been deleted by personnel at CENTCOM. And we expect that the Department of Defense will provide these and all other relevant documents to the committee.
In this hearing, they said nearly half of the intelligence analysts at U.S. Central Command said there are serious problems with the integrity of their work. Let's bring in our panel. Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst; Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post; and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Judge, if you think back to all of the focus on the pre-Iraq War intelligence, right, and all of the uproar about what was coming through the chain, about who knew what, you look at this. This is a big deal.
It is a big deal, and I'm sorry to say I think it's going to go nowhere in the Obama administration. If the president's purpose, or the purpose of the people around him, was to shade intelligence with which the American people are familiar in order to justify his behavior, they are not going to prosecute the people that did the shading. But there's only 11 months to go in his term. These are prosecutable events. The willful destruction of information that the government requires be kept, particularly if they have reason to believe that this stuff is about to be subpoenaed by the Congress or by any other subpoenaing authority. But don't look for anything other than political outrage and editorial outrage over this in the next 11 months.
Chuck.
Well, it's really hard. I have to say, it's very hard to know what to make of these statements that we just heard. Look, the story in Iraq that you alluded to was the hyping of intelligence to justify an invasion. This would have been the, I don't know what, the opposite of hyping of intelligence, the downplaying of intelligence to justify not having more aggressive.
No, it would make it more rosy, a better picture of the fight against ISIS.
Exactly. Downplaying the danger, downplaying the threat, whereas the threat was exaggerated in the case of Iraq. That was the charge. And so when he says that emails have been destroyed, we don't know what those emails are or would have been. And we don't know, when they say 40% of the analysts, we don't know how many that is. Is that 4 out of 10? Is that 40 out of 100? There's a lot of smoke here, but I have to say, after watching the Benghazi committee sort of fizzle, I'm a little unclear as to exactly what they're going to produce out of this.
Charles.
Look, there's a matter of principle here, and there's also practical effect. On principle, you cannot have, particularly the military, these are presumably not political appointees, shading evidence and distorting it and corrupting it and perhaps hiding it and deleting it. But as to the practical effect, I believe the president when he said it didn't affect his decisions. He knew what was going on. I think the reason it would have no effect on his decisions is because with or without shaded intelligence, he believes that this, in the end, really doesn't matter. This is a man who believes that the arc of the moral universe is long and it tends towards justice. So why get all upset about the invasion of Ukraine, upset about what's happening in the South China Sea, or even the rise of ISIL? This is all 20th century stuff, you know, invading other countries, taking territory. To him, this is, and particularly in the Middle East, he calls it a quagmire. He thinks that the Russians who are actually winning this war are actually hurting themselves. Putin has no idea what to make of such a president on the other side of the table. So for Obama, whether the intelligence had been cooked or not, it wouldn't really matter. He's doing practically nothing, and he will continue to do it until the end of his term, because he thinks in the end nobody wins. It's quicksand. Why get involved?
I want to turn to what was also talked about today, this effort by the FBI to get into this phone by the San Bernardino shooter, and one of them, and Apple's pushback on this. Judge, today, Apple, the company, argued that it violates the company's First Amendment rights, that the FBI is seeking dangerous power through the courts. That was part of the argument made by Apple.
I read the briefs that Apple filed by a friend of mine and probably yours, Ted Olson, and it's a first-rate legal argument. The law in the Ninth Circuit, the western part of the United States, where this is going to be argued in California, is very clear. If forced speech is not permitted and software is speech, so without getting too into the First Amendment weeds, for the government to say, you will create this software for us, is the equivalent of, you will give us these words even though you don't want to articulate them, when the First Amendment says we are not permitted to compel you to do this. Big picture is, can the government, absent a statute from the Congress, conscript a private corporation to work for the government against the corporation's will? By private, I mean not owned by the government. Answer, this has never happened before.
Here's the DOJ statement today. The Justice Department's approach to investigating and prosecuting crimes has remained the same. The changes come in Apple's recent decision to reverse its long-standing cooperation in complying with all Writs Act orders. Law enforcement has a long-standing practice of asking a court to require the assistance of a third party in effectuating a search warrant. Department attorneys are reviewing Apple's filing and will respond appropriately in court.
If Apple had in a drawer what the government wanted, Apple would have to turn it over. But what the government wants doesn't exist. The government thinks it has the power to force Apple to create it. That's unprecedented.
This is a really interesting move by Apple and Ted Olson to make this about the rights of the corporation.
Corporations are people?
Corporations are people, too, as opposed to the rhetoric of Tim Cook, which has been all about the customers and the individuals and the owners of the iPhone. And I'm not sure that's a winning, it might win in a court. I'm not sure that's a winning argument for Apple in public opinion, because after all, we're talking about the phone of an individual who's clearly guilty, and there's clearly material evidence in there, and that individual happens to be dead. So his rights are kind of beside the point here. So I just thought that was a, clever, but possibly, in the court of public opinion, not that popular argument by Apple.
Charles?
I find this a weird and bizarre argument. The government is asking, what we're saying is, if the government asks for a key into a place where information is that could save a lot of people, you are compelled to turn it over. If the government asks you to make the key, it's a whole different thing. I'm not sure I understand a distinction like that and why it ought to matter. I do think if the principle is, can you be compelled to do anything in the name of law enforcement, is a legitimate argument. But once you concede that if you had a key, you have to turn it over, I'm not sure what the creation means. I understand Apple's political argument. Once I create a back door, it's going to spread. Everybody will have it. We'll all be less secure. Yes, that's a reasonable, logical argument. But if that is not the argument that is being made in court, I don't understand what leg Apple has to stand on.
To his point, it does seem a little bit that people are talking over each other. The FBI and the DOJ, they're saying it's one time, this thing. It's not a backdoor for eternity. And if there's information on that phone, they say, that could save other people's lives, why isn't that compelling?
Okay, so there's two responses to that. Why did the government wait 2.5 months if there's information on that phone that could save other people's lives?
Well, they were trying to get in it, apparently.
Well, they got to the point where they had to stop trying to get into it, because if you do it too many times, it'll destroy the content.
I would have tried 1, 2, 3, 4. I said
no less an authority on the internet and on gathering intelligence than General Michael Hayden explained this morning that once you use that key, it's there, its footprint is there, and people can hack into it and disable so much secure information on the internet, even the government's information.
Is there, but what does that mean? Is where? In the phone?
No, somewhere
on the internet in a hackable location.
Put them in a room, a padded room, and it's not on the internet. I don't understand this argument.
Well, you got to ask Tim Cook, because that's what he says.